Something is breaking inside Iran right now, not from the outside, not from American missiles or Israeli airstrikes or the naval blockade tightening around its ports. What is breaking is coming from within, and the people tearing it apart are not foreign enemies. They are Iranians. The generals are fighting the diplomats. The clerics are losing control. The streets are burning. And the regime that spent 47 years telling the world it would never surrender just surrendered its most sacred possession. The nuclear program, the red line that commander after commander swore on their lives would never be crossed. It was crossed, and what happened the moment that news reached the streets of Tehran, Mashhad, Isfahan, and 200 other cities across Iran is something no American bomb, no Israeli airstrike, and no Western sanction ever managed to produce. The Iranian people turned on the IRGC. To understand why that moment is so historically devastating, you need to understand the trap that was built before it. Because what the United States constructed at the Strait of Hormuz was not a conventional military operation. It was something far more sophisticated, far more dangerous, and far more effective than any weapon ever dropped on Iranian soil. Washington did not want to defeat Iran from the outside. Washington wanted Iran to defeat itself. The blockade was designed as a three-dimensional weapon. The military layer stops the ships. The economic layer cuts oil exports and chokes every import Iran depends on. But the third layer is the most devastating. The psychological layer, designed to shatter the regime's internal cohesion, to make trust impossible inside every corridor of power in Tehran, to turn the regime's own centers of authority against each other until the weight of suspicion does what no bomb could accomplish. And it is working with a precision that even the architects of the strategy may not have fully anticipated. Here's what makes this trap so ingenious. Normal commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is flowing. The world economy is largely unaffected. Saudi tankers pass freely. Emirati vessels move without interference. Only Iranian ships are being stopped. Only Iranian ports are locked. Only Iran is isolated. And every possible response Tehran considers makes the situation worse. Iran cannot close the strait in retaliation. The United States is already controlling it. Iran cannot threaten to cut global oil supplies. That card has been neutralized. And Iran cannot survive economically without its oil revenue. That revenue has effectively fallen to zero. According to intelligence assessments, Iran's oil storage capacity will be completely full within 10 to 14 days. When storage fills, production wells must shut down, and a shut well does not reopen with the flip of a switch. Reservoir pressure drops. Geological damage begins. Some wells take months to recover. Others never do. The blockade is not just cutting exports. It is permanently degrading Iran's long-term production capacity in ways that will outlast any ceasefire agreement. The refinery paradox is compounding the damage in a way that has stunned ordinary Iranians into a rage they cannot contain. Iran is the world's fourth largest oil producer, but its refining capacity cannot cover its own production. It must export crude and import refined gasoline and diesel. Right now, both sides of that loop are blocked. Nothing going out, nothing coming in. In a country sitting on enormous oil reserves, people are standing in fuel lines stretching for kilometers. Families are paying 40% more for food. Hospitals are running out of medicine. Cancer treatments have stopped. ATMs are running empty. Businesses are shuttering across every major city simultaneously. This is hitting the Iranian regime at its most fragile nerve. Because Iran's social contract, the silent agreement between the government and its people that kept the Islamic Republic functioning for 47 years, was always built on economics. No freedom, but cheap gasoline. No democracy, but bread on the table. That agreement has been shredded, and the people most furious about it are not the regime's longtime critics. They are the regime's own supporters. To understand why this collapse is happening now and happening this fast, you need to understand the fracture that was always there beneath the surface. Hidden behind slogans and ideology for decades, a fracture the blockade did not create. The blockade simply ripped away the last layer of cover. There are two completely different and now openly hostile power centers inside Tehran. The first is the IRGC Corps, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the generals, the hardliners, men who built their entire identity and reason for existing on resistance, on never backing down, on confronting the great Satan regardless of cost. This faction wants asymmetric escalation, mine-laying, cyber attacks, proxy operations, missile strikes, anything that signals defiance even when defiance is no longer strategically meaningful. Because for the IRGC, backing down is not a tactical decision. It is an existential surrender. The Revolutionary Guards were not built to make deals. They were built for conflict. As long as there is conflict, they are necessary. As long as there is an enemy, they have purpose. The moment there is peace, they must answer for what they have done to Iran's people, its infrastructure, its economy, and its future. The second power center is the diplomatic wing, President Pezeshkian's government. The technocrats, the pragmatists who want to keep the regime standing even if it means sitting at a negotiation table. This faction has been saying something behind closed doors that would have been unthinkable 1 year ago. The economy will completely collapse within 3 to 4 weeks. A ceasefire must happen. A deal must be reached, whatever it costs. According to reports leaking from inside Tehran, this clash had been building quietly for 2 years. The blockade became the moment the hidden fracture became a visible and irreparable crack. And then one moment changed everything. On April 17th, Iran's foreign minister posted on social media announcing that all commercial vessel passage through the Strait of Hormuz had been fully restored. A unilateral declaration. No deal behind it. No guarantee. No concession received in return. A single statement that burned Iran's last remaining card without getting anything back for it. The Strait of Hormuz was Tehran's leverage. As long as the threat of closure existed, oil prices stayed elevated. That pressure gave Iran room at the diplomatic table. The foreign minister eliminated that leverage with one post and received nothing in return. Washington's response was immediate. The United States military confirmed the blockade continues. It does not matter what Iran announces. That same day, Trump stated that Iran had agreed not to pursue nuclear weapons and would hand over its enriched uranium stockpiles. Whether every detail was accurate in that precise moment no longer mattered. What mattered was what happened inside Tehran when those words were heard. Regime figures across the government, across the IRGC, across the clerical establishment saw it as either a fabrication or a betrayal. And the explosion from within began. IRGC-linked media accused the foreign minister of treachery. Hardline commentators on state television called him the architect of appeasement. Since that announcement, he has neither spoken publicly nor been seen. Parliamentarians began openly turning on their own leadership. And then the third front ignited. The streets. But what is happening on Iran's streets right now is categorically different from every previous protest wave the Islamic Republic has survived. In 2009, it was the Green Movement. In 2019, the gasoline price protests. In 2022, the Masa Amini uprising. Each time, the people on the streets were largely drawn from populations the regime categorized as the opposition. This time is different. This time, the people pouring into the streets across more than 200 cities in all 31 provinces include the regime's own base, the people who sent their sons to fight, the people who endured decades of sanctions, the people who accepted hardship because they genuinely believed the ideology behind it. And they have arrived at a conclusion the IRGC cannot manage, cannot suppress, and cannot co-opt. They were lied to. The resistance economy was a slogan. Self-sufficiency was propaganda. The billions poured into Hezbollah, into the Houthis, into Iraqi militias were paid for by Iranian citizens, told they were financing resistance when they were actually financing a strategy that left them without electricity, without water, without medicine, and now without fuel. A 12-hour power cut in Tehran is not an abstraction. It is a family sitting in the dark in winter. A fuel line stretching for kilometers is a driver who cannot get to work, a farmer who cannot run a pump, a factory that cannot produce anything. Food prices rising 40% is a mother calculating which meal she can afford for her children today and which one to skip. President Pezeshkian reportedly told IRGC commanders directly the words that define this entire moment. If there is no ceasefire, the economy will completely collapse within 3 to 4 weeks. The IRGC did not listen. Because it cannot listen. Its entire institutional existence depends on not listening. Chants of the army is what the people have begun spreading through protest crowds. This is not a random slogan. It is a deliberate message directed at Iran's regular military, the Artesh, a call to the professional soldiers who are not the IRGC, who do not share the Revolutionary Guard's ideological DNA, who have their own growing discontent with the war the IRGC chose to fight. Because the Artesh and the IRGC are entirely separate institutions, with entirely different cultures, loyalties, and calculations about what comes next. And for decades, a controlled rivalry existed between the two. kept in check by Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's personal authority. Khamenei is gone. Mojtaba Khamenei was declared the new supreme leader following his father's death on the first night of the war. For over 35 days, there has been no image, no video, no public appearance. Only written statements read by others. Reports indicate he was wounded in airstrikes on Tehran and transported to Moscow on a Russian military aircraft when Iranian medical facilities proved insufficient. While the supreme leader lies in a Moscow hospital, the question of who actually leads Iran has no clean answer. And into that vacuum, three men have moved. IRGC Supreme Commander Vahedi, the country's de facto leader. A man shaped entirely by conflict, for whom not negotiating is not a strategy. It is a reflex. Zolghadar, the National Security Council Secretary, whose appointment was extracted from President Pezeshkian under IRGC pressure. And Mohsen Resign, one of the IRGC's founding commanders, who in 1988 wrote to Ayatollah Khamenei arguing the UN ceasefire resolution should not be accepted. Khamenei overruled him, describing the decision as drinking poison. In 2026, there is no supreme leader capable of making Resign drink the poison chalice. None of these three men were elected. None are clerics. All were formed in an era where resistance was always the answer, regardless of the cost borne by the population they claimed to lead. And this is where the mullahs enter the picture in a way that has shaken the clerical establishment to its foundations. For 47 years, Iran was defined as a theocracy. Power flowed through religious authority. The clerics justified the IRGC's actions. The IRGC enforced the clerics' edicts. Each needed the other. Each gave the other legitimacy they could not generate alone. What is happening right now is the dissolution of that arrangement in real time. If a three-person IRGC committee can govern the country without meaningful clerical input, then the theocracy has become a facade. The Islamic Republic is no longer Islamic in any governing sense. It is a military dictatorship with religious branding. The mullahs are watching decades of accumulated authority dissolve into irrelevance, unable to stop it, trapped between military commanders who no longer need their blessing and streets that no longer respect them. A former culture minister went public with an assessment that would have been unthinkable a year ago. He warned openly that Iran was losing not just the military war, it was losing the psychological war, the regime's own former minister saying this publicly. And the proxy network, the axis of resistance Tehran spent decades and tens of billions of dollars constructing, is simultaneously evaporating. It was never held together by military capability alone. It was held together by perception. The perception that Tehran was powerful, that Tehran's backing meant something. That perception is now broken. Hezbollah was already in rebuilding mode after losing supply lines. The Houthis were running increasingly pragmatic survival calculations. Iraqi militias had retreated under pressure from Baghdad. And all of these organizations witnessed the same pivotal moment. Iran could not hold its own territorial waters against the United States Navy. Tehran's deterrence was tested at the strait it had threatened for decades, and it collapsed. Hezbollah leadership is now asking the question that once asked cannot be unasked. If Tehran cannot guarantee our security, why are our fighters dying for Tehran? The money flowing from Tehran to Beirut has stopped. The political support provided to Iraqi militias is no longer available. The promises made to partners across the region are falling flat in ways no revolutionary rhetoric can disguise. And Iran's own population watched for years as their government poured billions into Beirut and Sana'a and Baghdad, while ordinary Iranians carried water containers through the streets of their own capital. That contradiction can no longer be hidden. Now we arrive at the moment no analyst, no intelligence service, and no government truly believed it would see in this form, the nuclear program on the table. For 45 years, Iran's uranium enrichment was not just a weapons program. It was the regime's claim to regional power, its symbol of defiance, the IRGC's most sacred institutional possession. Commander after commander swore this was the red line that would never be crossed, never negotiated, never surrendered. By June of 2025, Iran held over 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, enough material for more than 10 nuclear warheads. The breakout time had collapsed to nearly zero. That stockpile was distributed across 3 underground fortresses: Natanz, buried in mountain rock; Isfahan, holding roughly half the stockpile in tunnels more than 90 meters deep; Fordo, built inside a mountain and considered resistant even to direct bombing; The Pentagon had drawn up plans to physically seize that stockpile by force. The 82nd Airborne parachuting into enemy territory. Special forces entering tunnels in hazmat suits. Former defense officials described it as a logistics nightmare more complex than Normandy. Theoretically possible, practically almost inconceivable. But the blockade made that plan unnecessary, because Tehran's leadership did the mathematics the IRGC tried to prevent. What does a regime whose oil revenue has collapsed to zero do with enriched uranium? What does a country where people stand in water lines and medicine shortages gain from a nuclear stockpile? Uranium is a bargaining chip. But regime survival is not a bargaining chip. It is the only calculation that matters when the clock is running out. According to Trump's statement on April 16th, Iran agreed not to possess nuclear weapons and to hand over its stockpiles of enriched uranium. The red line that 45 years of revolutionary identity was built around was effectively crossed by the regime itself. And it detonated inside Iran like nothing before it. Because the IRGC's upper command is now facing a choice between three options. None of them leads somewhere bearable, except the uranium handover. Institutional suicide for the revolutionary identity that gives the IRGC its reason for existing. But a survival chance for the regime's physical structure. Sabotage the decision, move stockpiles, block access to facilities, and invite the Trump administration to put every remaining card on the table simultaneously. Or attempt an internal coup against Pezeshkian, declare military rule, and hammer the final nail into a regime already collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Every option means loss. Every path leads somewhere worse. And what is visible right now, underneath the fury in the IRGC's public statements, is that reluctantly and with barely suppressed rage, they are being dragged toward the first option. But none of this is settled. None of this is finished. The Artesh is watching. Some commanders have begun voicing discontent that goes beyond private grumbling. The diplomatic wing is quietly trying to pull the regular military toward its position, an alliance that would completely shatter the IRGC's internal dominance. The IRGC reads political maneuvering it does not control as a coup attempt. And when the IRGC reads something as a coup, its response is historically brutal. Washington knows this. And Washington is waiting. Because waiting is the most powerful weapon Washington holds in this moment. Every day the blockade continues, Iran weakens further at the negotiating table. Every day the oil wells edge closer to forced shutdown. Every day the fuel lines grow longer. Every day more ordinary Iranians ask the question regimes cannot survive being asked by their own base. Why are we paying this price? For whom? For what? Look at what the regime is doing to manage the streets. The January uprising spread across all 31 provinces, millions of people. Security forces opened fire and thousands were killed. And when the regime tried to organize counter-rallies to demonstrate its support, it did something that reveals exactly how hollow that support has become. It threatened the families of detained protesters. Attend the rally. Show public support for security forces, or your relatives' prison sentences will be increased. When a government fills its support demonstrations through execution threats directed at grieving families, the only thing keeping it standing is fear. And fear only works when the one doing the frightening looks powerful. The Iranian regime does not look powerful right now. A year and a half ago, the same pattern played out in Damascus. Tens of thousands of Assad supporters in the streets, flags, slogans, shows of force that looked like genuine strength from the outside. And when Assad fled, everything evaporated overnight. The Soviet Union did not collapse from external military pressure. It collapsed because its own bureaucrats stopped believing in it. The Shah had one of the most modern militaries in the region. And when that army refused to fire on its own people, the entire structure ended within weeks. History does not repeat in identical form, but the structural signature of a regime approaching collapse has always looked the same from the inside. A power vacuum at the top, filled by competing factions rather than legitimate succession. A military functioning as a collection of factions with different loyalties. A civilian government paralyzed by military veto. A clerical establishment reduced to irrelevance. An economic system that stopped delivering the basic social contract. In streets where the regime's own supporters are asking out loud whether the people who led them here were ever actually on their side. Iran in 2026 has every one of these features simultaneously. And in the background, China is silent. As long as Beijing's own ships can pass through the strait to reach Saudi Arabia and the UAE, it is not intervening. A country China called a strategic partner for years has been left completely alone in its most critical moment. Because China is calculating Taiwan, its own economy, its own survival. Iran does not fit into those calculations right now. Russia is consumed by its own exhaustion, Ukraine, internal purges, economic pressure. Moscow has no hand to extend toward Tehran. Iran has never in its modern history been this isolated. Not during the 1979 revolution, not during the 8-year war with Iraq, not during any sanctions regime the West has imposed over 4 decades. Washington built this trap without dropping a single bomb on Iranian soil. It closed the strait, not to the world, only to Iran. It turned time into a weapon. It let the blockade's economic consequences move through Iran's population at their own pace. And it watched 47 years of suppressed contradictions explode the moment economic survival became impossible, and the gap between what the regime promised and what Iranians actually lived became too wide to bridge with any slogan. Trump could have fired a missile and united Iran against a common external enemy. History shows this repeatedly. External threats close internal cracks. External enemies unify divided populations. A bomb on Iranian soil would have given the IRGC exactly the narrative needed to suppress the streets, consolidate authority, and demand sacrifice in the name of national survival. Instead, Washington chose economic siege, psychological pressure, time. The strategy of making Iran's internal contradictions do the work that no weapon could accomplish from the outside. And the most consequential result of that strategy is happening right now, not in the Strait of Hormuz, not in any military headquarters. On the streets of more than 200 Iranian cities where the IRGC's own supporters are turning against it, where soldiers in the regular Artesh are hearing chants calling them to the people's side, where mullahs are watching their institutional authority be absorbed by military commanders who no longer need their blessing, where a president cannot choose his own cabinet and a supreme leader is absent, and the 3 men actually running the country have no answer for any of this. Iran is not acting like a country anymore. It has become a battlefield where 3 warring power centers fight each other while 88 million people pay the cost. The next decision will not come from Washington. It will come from inside Tehran, from rooms where generals are calling diplomats traitors, from mosques where clerics are watching centuries of religious authority dissolve into irrelevance, from streets where the people who once believed are discovering that everything they were told was the price of standing for something was actually the price of maintaining someone else's power. Throughout history, the verdict on that condition has always arrived faster than anyone predicted. A regime rotting from within does not require a final blow from the outside. It requires only the moment its own people stop carrying it. That moment across Iran is closer tonight than it has ever been.